Hi, my name is Cato Andah, and I'm the author of Reflections of a Hopemonger. You know, as human beings, every action we take is actually motivated by a hidden desire. And being complex human beings, oftentimes it's a set of hidden desires. Becoming our best selves mean that we have to be honest with ourselves and actually dig deep and try and figure out what exactly those desires are. It's too easy to blame somebody or some situation or the devil or say God told you to do something when in fact oftentimes it actually could be our own desires that are motivating certain decisions. And so this was the thinking behind my writing an essay called The Voices. And so I'm going to read an excerpt from that essay. So here goes. This is from The Voices. I'm going to start with a Bible verse. And this is from 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 10. There are, it may be, so many kinds of voices, and none of them is without signification. Disclosure, I hear so many kinds of voices. But before I elaborate, please allow me to clarify. I don't physically hear the voices. I don't have auditory hallucinations. And yet, the voices I hear are as real to me as these words that I write. The different voices have different agendas in my life. Each voice, when it speaks, elicits an emotional response from me. And each voice, if left unchallenged, is persuasive enough to sway me in the direction of its bidding. I think of the different voices as different frequency bands on a radio. The more I tune in to a particular voice's wavelength, the more dominant the voice becomes. But when I challenge or tune out a voice, that voice then fades out. Let me introduce you to some of my voices. Myopic voice is rooted in selfishness and routinely refuses to consider a situation from different perspectives or its possible impact on the people in my life. Impulsive voice persuades me to go after short-term gratification at the expense of my long-term interests. Voice of self-deception camouflages the voice of deeper hidden emotions that I'm reluctant to acknowledge. Voice of self-deception suppresses my authentic self. When I successfully strip away the voice of self-deception, then voices of my flesh become audible. These include voice of anger, voice of resentment, voice of fear, voice of pain, voice of damaged pride, voice of ulterior motives, voice of shame, voice of rejection, voice of self-condemnation, and voice of not good enough. Individually and collectively, these voices of the flesh condemn me, erode my self-esteem, sabotage my relationships, and keep me mired in hopelessness, fear, hurt, discouragement, and a victim mindset. But thank God that these negating voices are not the only voices that call out to me. I also have voice of truth, which is the voice of God. Through experience, I've learned to pick out the ways the voice of God talks to me. Primarily, I hear the voice of truth from reading and meditating on the Word of God. When I am consistent with this practice, voice of truth becomes the strongest voice in my head, and it more easily challenges and drowns out the negative voices. The litmus test for me in identifying voice of truth is that it is completely congruent with the biblical principles by which I choose to live my life. If a voice contradicts the word of God or encourages me to go along a line of thinking that results in resentful, hateful, unwholesome thoughts, then I know that it is not voice of truth, because voice of truth convicts me when I've done wrong. However, voice of truth never condemns me. Voice of truth empowers me to see that I have the power and I have the ability to choose my response to any unfavorable situation like the winner that I am. When I regularly tune into Voice of Truth, it enables me to also hear Voice of Higher Self. Voice of Higher Self stays true to my principles, regardless of prevailing circumstances. Voice of Higher Self collaborates with Voice of Truth, sets me on the path of God's perfect will for my life. When I work with Voice of Higher Self, I am resilient, positive, and unstoppable. Tested. It was early spring 1998 in Cambridge, England. I had been a stay-at-home mom for the first 9 months of my son's life. I had thoroughly enjoyed this season of my life and was now looking forward to launching a new career. I had been offered my dream job with a great income, opportunities for growth, and a company that I was excited to work for. We considered various options for childcare, eventually deciding to hire an au pair. Well, for the rest of the chapter and to find out what happens in that story, again, it's in Reflections of a Hopemonger, and it's in the chapter called The Voices. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.